Chapters of history America wants you to forget. As someone who's a fan of history, I see this by Simon Whistler on his Into the Shadows channel and go, all right, I'm in. I'll buy it. Dive in, shall we?
The United States of America may be celebrated as a beacon of democracy and freedom worldwide, yet there's no denying that it's committed some deeply troubling acts. Despite DC's public stance on upholding human rights and adhering to international agreements, looking at you, Don, the very rights that the US claims to champion have often been violated in the quest for military victory. Even more troubling is the fact that these actions were frequently concealed from the public. When you peel back the curtain, you uncover a mountain of war crimes built on the suffering of millions of innocent people. Some of these crimes are among the most egregious in history, while others have occurred in relatively recent conflicts. Every nation has its skeletons, and now it's time to expose some of Uncle Sam's. All right, before we...
I think that this is a pretty fair video and fair topic, right? I've always been a proponent of at least having knowledge, right? Obviously, there are going to be things that are under NDAs, that are going to be under operational security. There's going to be things that I'm not going to have access to, right? There's no reason for me to have access to coordinates or information of somebody who is, in some other country on some mission it's compartmentalized information. There's no need for me to do that. That being said, there's a difference between, it being public information, right? Like something like these things are, and whether they come out at the time or after the fact and choosing to ignore it, right? You have to find your conclusions. You have to, intake not only the things you agree with, but even the things you disagree with, or the things that even make you uncomfortable, to come to your most definitive conclusion.
Start accusing the US military of war crimes, it is important to understand what a war crime is. If you're not familiar with the subject, we've got a whole video all about how war crimes work, and it delves into that really deeply. But in short, a war crime is a grave violation of the Geneva Conventions during wartime. The term also serves as a catch-all for various violations of these conventions. It includes acts like torture, killing unarmed non-combatants, pillaging, assault, and other heinous crimes. Interestingly, the US tends to follow its own rules when it comes to international law, though it generally aligns with the practices of most other countries. For instance, the US has not fully ratified the entire Geneva Conventions, nor has it ratified the global ban on landmines. Yet, in their policies, they usually adhere to the international norms concerning both of these issues. So, on what occasions has the US really stepped out of line, causing suffering and death with innocent people? Let's get into it. Oh, just before we do understand that not every member of the US military or every American is a war criminal. That would be insane. We're just trying to head off the comments at the pass.
Yeah.
We also recognize that other countries around the world have also committed significant war crimes. However, that's not what we're talking about in today's video, so let's carry on. I both appreciate and hate that has to be a disclosure. I appreciate the disclosure because it's, nobody's assuming that this is every single individual of the U.S. military. That would be incredibly disingenuous and incredibly unprofessional to do so. That's a broad overgeneralization that is just inappropriate. And also, this happens to be the focus of the video, right? Yeah, we have things like Cambodia S-21, right? We have Unit 731 in Japan. We have the obvious camps in World War II Germany, right? We have other countries, other militaries, other cultures who, yes, have and do still violate Geneva suggestions, as I'll call them, right? So I appreciate that. Yeah, cool. This is a relevant disclosure. I hate that it has to happen. I had Raven, regular viewer, sent me a video the other day, and it was really funny because, in a good way, because it was talking about how this dude missed the concept of normal. But half the video was a disclosure of I missed when people, it was effectively just I missed when people played the game. People didn't pull a Johnny Somali, and people didn't just do weird things like Sneeko, right? IRL nuisance streamers, right? People weren't as combative and think you were attacking them just when you try to merely correct them on something they have wrong, right? Missing that semblance of normalcy. And it was just one of those things that, I appreciated the video, but also realized that people are in a sad state right now because we have to have half a video of disclosures, and disclosures like these to really just, push basic concepts that should be words as written, video as viewed, right? The common sense dictates, this is the subject of the video.
we're not singling this out. Sure, this is technically singling this out. Bro, I could rant upon this. Let's not rant on this anymore. Let's get into this.
People today believe that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, also known as North Korea, harbors a deep animosity toward the United States because of the latter's celebration of freedom and its individualistic way of life. It's commonly assumed that this stance is in direct opposition to the Kim regime's lineage of revered leaders who are treated almost like gods while the rest of the population endures severe abuses. Although there is some truth to this contrast, the two countries indeed differ starkly in their rights afforded to their citizens, many tend to overlook some of the astonishing war crimes the United States has committed against North Korea throughout history. The reality is that such cultural trauma is not easily forgotten, even if North Korea was always destined to follow the path that it has. During the Korean War, which began only 1 year after the fourth signing of the Geneva Convention in 1950, the United States burned North Korea to the ground. The brief conflict, lasting just 3 years, saw the United States Air Force drop over 100,000 tons more ordnance on North Korea than was dropped throughout the entire Pacific theater of World War II. The destruction was so monumental that, according to Time, bombers spent most of their flight miles merely searching for targets. By 1953, the average building in North Korea was about a foot tall. Dean Rusk, the State Department's official in charge of East Asia at the time, stated that the US planes bombed, quote, everything that moved in North Korea, every brick standing on top of another. This act stands as a war crime in itself, carried out under the pretense of proportionality and indiscriminate targeting. 22 North Korean cities were completely leveled. Furthermore, 32,000 of the more than 600,000 tons of explosives dropped on the Hermit Kingdom in just 3 years were in the form of napalm, the flammable jelly substance that a decade and a half later burned down half of Vietnam. While using napalm is not considered a war crime when it targets military personnel, it unquestionably becomes one when it's aimed at civilians. If you drop 32,000 tons of any kind of weapon on a country, you're almost guaranteed to hit civilians. Yet the US didn't just hit one or two individuals. It's estimated that 282,000 North Koreans died solely as a result of the US bombing campaign. In total, between 2 and 3 million North Koreans would later perish due to starvation or exposure caused by the bombings in a nation where the population in 1950 was only 10 million. General Curtis LeMay, who led the Strategic Air Command, later boasted to Air Force historians that, quoting him here, over a period of around 3 years, we wiped out, 20% of North Korea's population as direct casualties of war or through starvation and exposure.
So how is this handled within the military, though, is what I have to question, because yeah, I feel like this could be seen as a boast. I think that Simon Wisso is correct in this capacity. I think this is interesting. Like, I like subjects like these. Obviously, I don't get some sort of sick enjoyment out of it, but because this opens up the door to conversations, this allows you to look at it. Like, for example, my knowledge of the Korean War is very minimal. It is incredibly poor. By my own admission, right? So looking at things like this, being able to understand more of it, being able to look at what came out of it, and being able to look at what controversy stemmed from it, also not only paints a picture of what was going on in the time with the military and going on nowadays with the military, but also what was public sentiment on this, what socially did what social ramifications did this have, both on the civilian side and the military side of things? Did this bias people against military? Did recruitment numbers rise or fall from this? Were people held accountable? Were people not held accountable? Was it brushed under the rug? Were people pardoned? I think that there's a lot of questions that rise from things like this. And even sometimes if the answer isn't the one you wanted, right? How, like, the Holodomor rose from dekulakization, right? Like, things that are just so easily preventable. Even if it's an answer you don't like, at least you're able to acknowledge the information and be able to have a greater understanding of the world around you and potentially try to stop future tragedies by being educated.
End quote. By sheer numbers, that means almost everyone in North Korea today is either descended from or knows someone who lost their life during that time. So yeah, definitely the freedom they despise. Right? As far as we understand, no one was ever held accountable for the destruction of North Korea, and it's unlikely that anyone ever will be. Where do you even...
That's interesting. I mean, obviously, at this point, we are, as of this reaction, 2025, right? It's been a hot minute. I think this might fall under a similar situation as we've discussed in the past. Unit 731, the United States taking Shira Ishii's work, being able to pardon effectively Shira Ishii and professionals, quote unquote, of Unit 731. It's really interesting that nobody was held accountable, as I feel it would be very easy to scapegoat some boisterous blowhard, if you will, top brass, who was getting a little too mouthy, and just be like, oh, well, this individual, we were to dishonorably discharge him because, he, did X, Y, and Z here. This is, to save face, if you will. I think it's interesting. I'm going to have to look more into the Korean War as a subject, because clearly I don't have sufficient knowledge and understanding of it. But on top of that as well, I feel that because they're people I regularly associate with were alive during the Korean War, there could be very real social ramifications for dealing with the subject.
Begin with Vietnam. US forces were active both on the ground and in the air over this communist nation, engaging the Viet Cong for an extended period. Over the course of the conflict, a vast range of American-perpetrated war crimes occurred, from isolated killings of civilians falsely claimed to be Viet Cong to full-blown massacres and indiscriminate bombing of civilian populations. Now, we've already previously discussed the use of napalm in the Korea section, and numerous photographs documenting its use have circulated widely. You may well be familiar with the infamous image of a naked girl whose clothes were burned off while her skin peeled away. We're not going to display that photo here, but what we can tell you is that she wasn't an enemy combatant. In terms of...
I'm pretty sure I have seen the photo. I will continue to refuse to show the photo, because it's just better to not, honestly. There's certain things I just won't share. There's certain things that it's good enough. If you feel as such where you need to go and view that image in the strictly historical sense for that understanding, I'm sure that there are archives on the internet and appropriate professional places in which to view it, much in the same way that you can read something like Mein Kampf. There are abilities to understand what Funny Mustache Man was reading in a professional manner, right? You're looking at it and looking through it and just like, okay, so this was his headspace. This was what led to, Workers' Party, turning into the not Sea Party, right? The professional ways to engage with the material, right? Obviously, not just some sick ha-ha tee-hee war, because war is brutal. War is rough. That much is not lost on me, I assure you. Yeah, no, I know of the photo, though.
Specific moments where war crimes were committed. One might begin with the most infamous US war crime in Vietnam, the My Lai massacre. On the morning of March the 16th, 1968, Lieutenant Frank A. Barker and his unit were airlifted to a small Vietnamese village called Song Mi, which was at that time known as My Lai. Their mission was to capture or kill Viet Cong members and sympathizers. Barker's unit had been informed that most of the civilians in Song Mi would be away at the local market, but this turned out not to be the case. While incorrect intel can occur during war, what is unacceptable are Barker's orders to his GIs to burn houses, kill livestock, destroy foodstuffs, and close wells. As the soldiers entered the village, the unit indiscriminately massacred men, women, children, and the elderly. They encountered no resistance as they butchered the residents of the village and its surrounding areas. Those not killed on the spot were herded into nearby ditches and executed by shooting. They fired into houses and
I expect this of the Khmer Rouge from Cambodia. Like, under Pol Pot. I don't expect this from the United States military. There has to be some sort of concession or some sort of ability to hold people accountable, even if it's just orders from management. Clearly, if, their superior officer gave them the orders, at minimum, the superior officer should be held accountable, should they not? There has to be conventions for this.
Through demolitions into shelters without even verifying whether anyone was inside. Many died, almost all civilians, and numerous individuals were raped by US soldiers before they died. In total, between 500 and 700 Vietnamese civilians were slaughtered and brutalized for no other reason than simply being present. This was a war crime in every sense of the word. After the unit returned, with one KIA and several wounded from booby traps in the area, Colonel Orrin K. Henderson was assigned to investigate the massacre. And by investigate, we mean he tried to cover the whole thing up and suppress the truth. But in the end, the facts emerged. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr., who was present and refused to kill any civilians, later stated that not only did the US top brass work hard to cover their tracks, but that he was also ostracized for blowing the whistle on the massacre. In his own words, quote, "After it broke in the United States, I was not a good guy. I was sure not being invited to Annapolis or West Point or any other university that I've been to since because I was a traitor.
This is actually getting. So I was about to note at the end of the section, this is very different military philosophy than World War II. This is drastically different. This is kind of wild to watch in real time. So something like this. This is a tactic used in modernity to discredit, right? Air Force personnel who had the protest with self-immolation. Was there not dismissal of his mental condition and, oh, well, he was a troubled individual, something, his service record says this. We see back as far as this, that this same tactic is being used to discredit people who are unfavorable, who well, you shouldn't have said the quiet part. You shouldn't have said that. When I would argue the correct thing, the just thing to do would be to say that. I mean, obviously, the correct and just thing would be for this to not happen in the first place, certified skill issue status. But for someone to not engage, I mean, is this illegal and lawful order? Does this even come down to your superior officer says it? Is it legal and lawful? I don't know the answer to that, if I'm being completely honest. And I think there's people who would be better equipped to really say one way or the other. It's looking at this, looking at World War II history. This is a drastically different military.
I was a communist. I was a sympathizer. I was neither one of those.
He was the
Those
other.
who spoke out against the massacre were eventually rewarded for their bravery, while the vast majority of those who committed the atrocities escaped significant justice. Some died before they could be court-martialed, while others received lengthy prison sentences only to be pardoned early in their terms. Many were acquitted, and numerous charges were dropped, including those against Colonel Henderson. Although public apologies have been issued for the My Lai massacre, true justice was largely never served. Today, a memorial stands in Vietnam at the site where the atrocity happened. My Lai might be the most famous massacre of Vietnam, but it was by no means the only one. In the 1960s, the Mekong Delta served not only as a stronghold for the Viet Cong, but also as home to 6 million Vietnamese civilians. By the late 1960s, peace talks had begun, yet the Americans were still aggressively working to solidify their position at the negotiating table. American commanders aimed to pacify the Delta and eliminate entrenched Viet Cong fighters, which led to the authorization of free fire zones. These zones were effectively areas where US forces were allowed to fire on anything that moved within a specified perimeter. The underlying idea was that by clearing out the civilians, anyone remaining would be a North Vietnamese combatant and therefore fair game. This tactic was
Okay, and sure, in a vacuum, yeah, I guess the logic can track. But in practice, that's not how that's going to work, especially because everyone reacts to trauma differently. Anyone watching this video, I mean, you can have a 9mm handgun fire next to you, right? And everyone's going to have a different reaction. Some are going to be angry, some are going to be upset, some are going to be just too frozen to do anything, right? Just from the noise of a 9mm bullet, right? Like, and now we'll apply a war setting to it. This doesn't feel like this was thought out.
Intended as a countermeasure to the Viet Cong's guerrilla strategy of hiding among civilian populations. However, there was a problem. The US either wouldn't or couldn't actually clear the civilians, especially considering that the Delta was a Viet Cong stronghold. And even if they managed to clear the area, one has to ask, where were the residents supposed to go once their village had been burned to the ground? But nonetheless, the US 9th Division struck hard and fast using military gunships, bombing raids, and artillery fire. Generals and commanders alike were fixated on ensuring high body counts even if the victims were non-combatants. Soldiers and pilots received orders to shoot Vietnamese civilians who were fleeing, and later those involved described a campaign of utterly indiscriminate killing with vast swaths of land obliterated. This continued for over a year. One concerned soldier who attempted to blow the whistle on the operation wrote in a letter to command that if his numbers were correct, it was equivalent to more than a My Lai every month for over a year. Operation Speedy Express reportedly claimed a body count of over 11,000 individuals. Despite the Mekong being a stronghold for the Viet Cong and guerrilla fighters traditionally being well armed, only 748 weapons were captured, indicating that the vast majority of those killed were in fact, civilians.
That's
The top
wild.
brass in the US military covered it up, fearing a public backlash at a time when the war was growing increasingly unpopular. Eventually, journalist Nick Turse uncovered the concerned soldier's letter in a long-forgotten archive in the early 2000s, sparking an investigation that ultimately exposed Operation Speedy Express and the mass casualties it caused. Not a single 9th Division soldier or commander has ever been court-martialed for their role in the operation, let alone tried for war crimes, leaving the families of the Vietnamese victims without justice for generations. Jumping forward.
I mean, honestly, you look at something like this and you see that there's just no repercussions. There's no consequences, right? Why should people follow rules if there's no consequences to not following the rules? Plain and simple. Words is written, right? They just... I mean, it's a subject that is uncomfortable to talk about. It's a subject that is difficult. Because then you start, then there's entrenched logic of, orders are orders. Is it a legal and lawful order? You never liked the military. There's different lines of rhetoric that'll come out. Absolutely. And everyone's going to have a differing opinion on this, especially as this nears modernity, right? It's not as far removed from modernity as something like World War II or World War I, right? It's not as far removed from the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, right? Like this was... There are still people alive who dealt with this. So this becomes a little bit of a sticky subject to deal with, because even if you bring facts to the table, I mean, there are people who will just have entrenched opinions and engage in rhetoric that may or may not be their own. They might just be repeating talking points. But I start to understand why the contention exists, and I start to understand a lot of the back and forth and why certain people develop certain opinions, whether that's pro-military, whether that's anti-military, pro-U.S. government, anti-U.S. government. It starts to make sense why people have certain opinions and what formulates that.
A few decades, the war on terror has witnessed multiple crimes committed by American soldiers and operatives. While the rules of war remain hazy when it comes to terrorists, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, where many operate as guerrilla fighters, those who do not identify themselves as combatants, for example by wearing a uniform, are considered exempt from the standard rules of war and can thus be freely targeted. However, the fog of war makes these judgment calls pretty damn murky. What's the difference between a civilian and a guerrilla terrorist dressed in civilian clothing who's unarmed? At times, it's almost impossible to tell, but that's not the central issue here. Even if the US believes it does not have a moral duty to refrain from committing acts that some might label as war crimes against terrorists, it absolutely has a moral responsibility to avoid doing so to innocent civilians. And in some instances, the distinction is very clear. These war crimes took the form of 3 separate massacres of innocent people. The first incident wasn't even carried out by the US military. It was perpetrated by a well-known American private military contractor called Blackwater. It happened in 2007. At the time, the surge of coalition forces in Iraq was well underway, which included many PMCs working for or with the US military. On September 16, 2007, armed American trucks entered Nisour Square in the heart of Iraq's capital, Baghdad. Blackwater guards were escorting a State Department convoy through the square when insurgents ambushed them. During the ensuing 20-minute gunfight, 17 innocent Iraqis were killed and many others were wounded. Later investigations found out that some victims had been shot in the back as they tried to flee. The case bounced around the courts for some time. Some blamed the government's reckless approach, while others pointed out that even with the surprise of an ambush and with PMCs like Blackwater cleared to defend themselves in cases of immediate danger, the 17 dead, countless wounded, and telltale bullets in the backs undermined their credibility.
I mean, and that's the thing. The bullets in the back. I mean, that's why. Like it's one of those defend that, right? It's not dissimilar to, I don't know. It's the rhetoric you hear of well, if somebody breaks into my house, I got that 12 gauge or I got that 45 ACP with their name on it. Except even if they break into your house and steal your TV and are leaving the premises, at least in Idaho, you can't do anything. You call the cops and you let them deal with it. You cannot take extrajudicial action to just cap them. That puts you in the wrong because they are no longer a clear and present threat to you. But people struggle with this basic concept. There is absolutely a difference if somebody is trying to impose on you and advancing on you and defending yourself, and somebody running out of the house with your flat screen TV and putting it in their back. There's an absolute difference there. Like, context does matter.
Calling the narrative that they were poorly trained for insurgent combat. 4 guards from the PMC were eventually indicted and convicted in 2014 on charges including murder, manslaughter, and various weapons offenses. In 2024, however, they were pardoned by President Trump. And this wasn't the first.
Why? This is 10 years later. Why are they still relevant? Did they do it? Yes, no. And that's where the court of a public opinion can take over as well. Sure, somebody may be pardoned, but at the end of the day, did you do it? Did you still do this? Okay, well, I don't want to associate with you, but I have been, in shake fist, smack fist on table. I have been pardoned. You can't do this. Last I checked, I was under the impression that a lot of the rhetoric was around 1A, was it not? You can say anything you want. Is that suddenly not okay when suddenly it's, I have this opinion. This was in a court. You were sent to prison, jail, something, and then you were pardoned. I'm allowed to have an opinion on an action you may or may not have committed. Oh, but you can't do that. Once again, we enter the territory of double talk and enter the territory of rules for thee but not for me and moving goalposts, right? Hypocrisy even. Like, yeah, you're allowed to have an opinion on that, whether they're pardoned or not. I mean, it's one of those things that you could just say, oh, well, you're this individual. I know I do not want to deal with you. And I mean, as far as I'm aware, legally, you are correct in doing so.
Massacre of the Iraq War. Back in 2005, while Staff Sergeant Frank Wucherich was moving with his unit through Haditha, a roadside bomb killed one of his fellow Marines. In the heat of the moment, Wucherich went into a frenzy, ordering his squad to shoot first and ask questions later. The 8-man Marine squad rampaged into Haditha on Wucherich's orders, blasting anyone who stood in their way. They fired into houses and lobbed grenades, even when no enemy combatants were reported to be present. By the end, 24 innocent Iraqi civilians lay dead, 10 of them women and children, and 1 man who was confined to a wheelchair. One soldier, Sergeant Sanig de la Cruz, who would later be granted immunity.
I mean, let's talk about that. Sorry, I had a cup of water spill. Let's talk about that. What are they? The funny minigun enemy from Bloodborne? Like, really? What's the logic there, Captain? Like, defend that to me. Did they have the AK-50 in the wheelchair? Like, come on now. That's a real brain scratcher there. I don't know on that one. That's one of those that, like, once again, context does matter. I mean, it depends on a number of factors, but like those are things that you hear, and it could be very possible that one of them maybe had an AK or something. Maybe had an AK carbine, right? I'm sure there's details that I am not privy to, but it's one of those things that is just, you notice that, like in the wheelchair, you saw the pink room, like, really? This is a legal and lawful order.
In exchange for his testimony, revealed that he had urinated on the dead at Haditha following the massacre.
Come on.
While every Marine initially faced charges over the incident, only Wucherich eventually saw his case culminate in a conviction. Of the 7 others charged, 1 was acquitted, and the charges against the remaining 6 were entirely dropped. In contrast, Wucherich faced 9 counts of manslaughter, a conviction that would result in a long prison sentence. Except that's not what happened. In January of 2012, he was found guilty of a single count of negligent dereliction of duty, a conviction that resulted in no jail time whatsoever. And you probably don't need me to say that it sounds like an incredibly lenient thing for inciting a massacre that killed 24 people.
I mean, this is one of those things, especially, the United States Marine Corps. As far as I'm aware, they police themselves. If this individual was part of the Marine Corps and he did commit atrocities, I'm sure that other Marines would not be so kind to him. I mean, yeah, absolutely. There should be justice. There should be, judicial proceedings as well as a sentence on understanding that this individual clearly did, commit these acts, right? Like, there is that side of things, absolutely. But as well as if you are, in the Marine Corps and you know that this person did this and can verify that this person did this, right? I mean, that seems like a very insular thing to self-police. And I'm sure that there were people who looked at him and went, "You piece of," I guarantee it. Whether anything happened from it, I don't know. Hard to say. But like, there's a reason why we do and don't do things. And there's a reason why we do and don't have consequences. Because this rewards reckless and deranged behavior, and everyone else must follow the rules. Rules for thee and not for me. Make a standard, make an example of this man if he did these acts, right? But clearly this is just lost on people anymore.
Some believe Vucinic was covering for senior leaders and more seasoned combat veterans in his squad when he took the fall. It was, after all, his first time in combat. Despite the alleged fear of harboring insurgents, no such threat existed, and as a result, 24 innocent lives were lost, including those of women, children, and the disabled. Another man who seemed to have snapped under the pressure was Sergeant Robert Bales. Having served 3 tours in Afghanistan, on March the 11th, 2012, he seemingly went rogue in the middle of the night and opened fire on 2 villages in Kandahar province, killing 16 people.
So what's the rhetoric on Twitter that pervades it? Something mental illness doesn't belong in the military, but it's often used to weaponize against individuals who are, transgender individuals, LGBTQIA plus friendly individuals. But yet, once again, rules for thee and not for me, having a mental break and doing an action like this, committing an act, that doesn't fall under that rhetoric. The picking and choosing of rhetoric is wild here. I look, identify as an AC-130. I don't care. There are so many other things to do with my day. Like, whatever you identify as, cool, awesome. Like, this, but no, this is what's going to be rewarded. I guarantee it. This is going to be, oh, no, but he's fine. Even though the person would quite literally on social media and even in real life definitely back up the, oh, well, no mental illness in the military. Mental illness doesn't belong here. Excuse you? There is a disconnect there. Like put down your phone, go touch some grass. There is some real stuff happening, my guys.
The story becomes murky from that point on. Some say he left on foot, although traversing the several kilometers between the 2 villages would not have allowed him to return to the base between his attacks, as was reported. Others claim he was accompanied by a group, while some insist he acted alone. What we do know is that Bales went door to door, trying each door, and if it was unlocked, he would enter and kill everyone inside using his pistol, rifle, and grenade launcher before burning some of the bodies. Upon returning to base, he simply said, "I did it." But the people of the...
How is he not in any way, shape, or form absent without leave? How is he in any way, shape, or form not court-martial, or at minimum breaking rocks into smaller rocks for a very long time?
Villagers and the families of those murdered in cold blood, 9 of whom were children with 6 others wounded, were angry for different reasons. Some were incensed because they had wanted Bales to receive the death penalty, yet he ended up with a sentence of life without parole in the United States after accepting a plea deal. Other village elders were furious because they believed the US government had covered up the real perpetrators of the attack, insisting that it was not just one man, but 20 soldiers operating from 2 helicopters. Meanwhile, some community members were convinced they heard walkie-talkie chatter before the attack, a detail that would have been impossible if only one person was responsible. We may never know what truly happened, but the US military has its story, and they're sticking to it. But there is nothing that compares, when discussing crimes committed during the War on Terror, to the use of the Abu Ghraib detention facility. Originally, it was a derelict Iraqi prison used by the Saddam regime to disappear those it targeted. When Saddam fell, the United States took over the prison for its own use. By 2004, the US had confined several thousand Iraqis there, broadly classified into 3 groups: common criminals, security detainees suspected of crimes against the coalition, and a small number of suspected high-value insurgency leaders. In reality, most of those held inside were civilians. It's not only the arbitrary detention in the name of security that made Abu Ghraib infamous. It was also the psychotic and sadistic regime of torture and human rights abuses perpetrated there. Originally published in The New Yorker by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, who also uncovered the story of the My Lai massacre, many of the photos have likely already reached you. One such image shows a hooded man hooked up to electrodes and standing on a box, with the clear threat that if he stepped off, he would be electrocuted. There are
Is this not cruel and unusual? Am I just drinking the stupid juice? Do we look at this and we just say, nah, that makes sense, Captain? Just continue on as is. Pip pip cheerio. Whatever. Like, no. Am I just drinking the stupid juice at this point? Like, am I orb of confusion status? This is. I appreciate the military because the military, at minimum, is direct and honest. You ask someone in the military, hey, do you like me? They'll tell you. No, I don't like you. I think you're a POS. I think you're the skittle-haired, window-licking freak. Hey, cool. Thanks for at least telling me. Like, appreciate the directness, the honesty, the ability to do something, right? The ability to seek ever greater challenges, right? Because you have to go through close quarters combat. You have to go through combat training, right? Like, you are made into a weapon. This is not what that is. Now, I mean, then you can argue, well, this is FBI, CIA, whatever, right? It's a funny letter agency, heading this. Whatever, that's whatever. Like, I'm not that I'm okaying it. This is not what the military is supposed to be. As far as I was aware, this is not in any way, shape, or form okay. And this is just, I mean, honestly, at this point, it's one of those things that people are going to say, Kip, this happens all the time. And I understand that. I understand that things like this happen more often than they should. The approximate time something like this should happen is zero, for all intents and purposes. It becomes distressing when no one is held accountable for it. It blows my mind that this is seen as okay, or this is seen as just the norm, when things like this very much so should be treated with the utmost seriousness and have ramifications, right? People being pardoned, right? That sucks. I didn't realize that that overrode my opinion of the situation. I didn't realize that a pardon overrode your opinion of them. And I don't have respect for people. Maybe it's because I do engage in light combat, right, sword fighting, etc. And I have a specific appreciation for weaponry, be that swords, blades, axes, glaives, halberds, even firearms. I don't, even if it's a toy firearm, I don't. People have criticized me. Oh, well, it's just an airsoft gun, or it's just a cap gun, right? Oh, chill out. No, because practice makes perfect. Am I expecting perfection from people? No, I don't think that's reasonable. But when we talk about weaponry and having respect for it and being that caliber of warrior, you want to talk about warrior caste, angry cop status? You want to talk about how the military is the warrior caste? This is also part of that warrior caste, is it not? And that's why, yeah, there needs to be self-policing. And I'm sure that there is self-policing. I'm sure there's conventions. Even then, as a dingus on the internet, hearing about things like this, I'm okay not having respect for these individuals. And these are not warriors. These are not committing actions like these, especially in high-stress situations in war. I understand that there are implications. I understand that sometimes there is not going to be a correct option. Going off of that, there is a difference between a warrior and a coward. These Blackwater individuals, on understanding that they did that, are cowards. And they have to rely on a pardon to even function in society, clearly. It is distressing, but this is also part of learning and part of educating yourself, is that you are going to feel uncomfortable. You are going to feel stress. You are going to have to come to facts, figures, conclusions that aren't going to feel the best. It's not all sunshine and roses, right? But that makes you have the most educated conclusion about anything, is to intake and acknowledge all aspects of something and to formulate your own opinion.
Many more pictures, many of which we just can't show due to YouTube's policies.
Yes.
But they're available if you wish to search them for yourself. But but we wouldn't recommend it. Prisoners were beaten while handcuffed, bent over railings, and cuffed to bars. They were hooded, stripped naked, and forced into humiliating positions, such as sitting on another's shoulders, simulating oral sex, or being arranged in a human pyramid.
This is why I would not do well in the military, especially if this is practice. And I am fully open and being transparent about this. If I had seen this, there is nothing stopping me from trying to issue trial by combat on this person. Not that I can legally advocate for it. In the hypothetical situation that Kip found himself in a situation like this with other warriors, quote unquote, there is nothing stopping me from issuing trial by combat and trying to make them stop. Now, obviously, what that would get me is on a certain little watch list, several watch lists probably, that would most likely end up with dishonorable discharge. That would make me end up breaking rocks into smaller rocks and mopping rain. If I was lucky for years upon years, I could not be complicit in acts like this. At that point, I would not be there to be a warrior. I would not be there to be a fighter. I would be complicit in heinous acts. And that's not I don't think anybody would reasonably sign up for that. And if you do sign up for that, that's outside of my ability to discuss. You have some you have some things you need to talk to yourself about. That's all I can really say. I cannot advocate for trial by combat legally. I cannot in any way, shape, or form in good faith endorse any of this. To just smugly use your position as a quote-unquote warrior class to do this? This is what you choose. This is the life you choose.
Some were knelt upon, others were covered with feces or shoved into corners while attack dogs snapped just inches from their skin. Others were bitten and were forced to remain naked around female soldiers. One was even put on a leash. Throughout the prison, both male and female prisoners were brutally raped. The Washington Post later revealed that in addition to these abuses, methods such as sleep deprivation, temperature extreme, sensory deprivation, and more were used as a form of torture inside the prison. And
why don't we just military top brass? Why isn't there sleep deprivation for them? Why isn't there sleep deprivation for individuals that commit this? Oh, but suddenly there's no accountability. Get off your high horses.
That's not even all of it, but you get the idea. Pictures of the worst crimes have actually not been released, and many of these techniques are reportedly still in use at the US detention site in Guantanamo Bay. The authorization for these enhanced interrogation techniques, as the Bush administration called them, came through an executive order issued by President Bush himself, as well as from orders by Ricardo Sanchez, the senior US military officer in Iraq, and by then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Some individuals died as a result of their abuse. However, the most disturbing aspect of the photographic evidence is that US soldiers appeared elated to have their pictures taken while torturing people. Many struck deliberate poses, snapping photos with grins next to dead bodies, and they seemed to overwhelmingly enjoy the experience of inflicting cruel abuse on innocent individuals. Many officers and soldiers were eventually either discharged from the US military, served only a short sentence in a military prison, or were acquitted. The sad reality, however, is that none of them received a prison term that truly reflected the gravity of their actions. Donald Rumsfeld asked to resign twice over Abu Ghraib, and President Bush denied both requests. In essence,
is that legal? Can you, I guess they can just pull you back, because even in 2025, a bunch of nuclear engineers were fired, and then, oh, well, we need you back. And it's, reasonably, my common sense conclusion was, well, if they fired you, if they let you go, you don't have to go back. But that's not how that works, from what I understand and what I've been told and informed. Because if you are on sensitive projects like that, they can just call you back. Now, in terms of if they have to pay you, if they have to honor any sort of prior PTO or anything, I don't know. I'm not the specialist on that. I would assume at that point they don't have to give you jack, and they can demand everything from you to effectively to finish the project. If anything, it's invocative of me to the Soviet secret cities, right? Having X city, city X, city Y, and it's a closed off city, and they work on specific projects. Because what ability to refuse do you have? I'm kind of at a loss for words. These photos, and to clarify again, this is not all military, and I think to say so is grossly inappropriate, is incredibly unprofessional, and is just it's not right. That's not correct. These are individuals who choose this. They are not the greater whole. These individuals that choose this, though, I have no respect for, and I don't think anybody should have respect for them. If you knowingly do this, if you knowingly choose this, choose to smile in macabre delight in situations like this, how dare you? What are you fighting for at that point? Because clearly it's not to protect, the constituents. Oh, well, I fight for democracy, and I fight for, to make sure that citizens at home can, can rest easy. Do you, though? Do you really fight for that? Or is it something more selfish? Because I think that there's more truth in my proposal, that there is something more heinous and dark even than what is prior. That's why I like talking to the military, because there's a human face behind people. Not everyone is this. And I'm sure that plenty of them would have conversations about, being, if they could, if it's not under NDA or OPSEC, right? Being in close proximity to things like this and not being okay with this, and that they don't have control over these unfortunate, just awful individuals. This is definitely an uncomfortable video, but I think making a point about still trying to intake and acknowledge the information is a first step into finding a better solution.
None of the top brass were held fully accountable for these war crimes. In 2024, one private military contractor was forced to pay $42 million to 3 plaintiffs who were tortured at the prison's hard site, where most of the worst abuses took place. This money can't restore justice for the victims or bring back those who were tortured to death at the hands of the Bush administration. It's widely believed that over 90% of those detained in Abu Ghraib were completely innocent, and even if 100% of them had been guilty, it would still not justify what occurred there. Now, there are many examples of war crimes committed by American soldiers while on duty. There are likely even more that we've yet to cover. What makes these crimes, along with others we haven't mentioned, so disturbing is that in the vast majority of cases, no one was ever held truly accountable. Some of the most horrific crimes imaginable were perpetrated against the most vulnerable, and the US government, along with its military branches, either covered them up or issued only a slap on the wrist. As a result, the victims and their families never saw any real justice for their worlds being shattered by a hail of gunfire, bombs, and torture. And for what? Orders? Duty? Honor? Now, you can't paint the whole US military with the same brush.
No.
And there are bad apples in every orchard. Yet, as the saying goes, one bad apple spoils the bunch. And for those in these countries who have had to interact with the US military, that's exactly what has happened. The bunch was spoiled, and the well was poisoned, leading people to view all American soldiers, rightly or wrongly, as capable of committing the same abuses. This perception is only reinforced by the fact that the perpetrators have faced no consequences proportional to the astonishing suffering inflicted on innocent people. The USA has a long way to go to repair these wounds. Thank you for watching.
And that's what it comes down to. I think that his summary was very good. And ultimately, it does come down to things that I've been talking about in a number of reactions. There are no consequences. There is no accountability anymore. And the way that you can begin to attempt to mend and fix things, not to invalidate anything that came prior, is to hold people accountable, is to, when things are verifiably committed, acts of atrocities, etc., people having photo evidence of just heinous acts, the way that you fix that, and we're gonna go. I'm gonna go back to this.
The dead body.
Because this is not the military. This is not being a warrior. And I'm in a very privileged place to criticize. Do not get me wrong. I'm in a very privileged place as a dingus on the internet civilian who looks at this and has nothing but disdain and disgust for people who do this. And this is not just in the US military, this is across the world as well. We can get to a point where things like this don't have to happen. It requires everybody working together. And I know it's a pipe dream. I know people will call me foolish for saying that, but I'd honestly rather remain a fool than in any way, shape, or form ever okay something like this. And I get it. There are things in war that I haven't seen. I get that there are things that I just wouldn't understand. And there are things that people closet themselves up with, drink, and never talk about. Not necessarily because they're under NDA or OPSEC, but they can't discuss it because they don't know how. They don't know how people are going to really react to that. And I think the takeaway is we need to learn from history, learn from all aspects of it. Monsters, heroes, villains, and understand and acknowledge what was done and why things led to what happened and why things happened after it, why and how to work towards a better future. But I digress. I've taken enough of your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Simon Whistler, for making such an amazing video. I do appreciate this. I know this is a very hard topic to talk about. I feel that Simon presented this in a very factual, objective manner. I definitely added my own biases and I definitely added my own opinions to this. And I want to clarify that this is not every military member. Clearly, as he even says, it's a few bad apples. It's a few villains in the midst who ruin it on an international scale. And we can and will need to do better. So thank you all for watching. I appreciate it.